This photograph of two companions appeared innocent until historians unearthed a chilling subtext. Dr. Natalie Chen recalibrated her digital scanner, preparing to breathe life into another batch of daguerreotypes from the museum's newly acquired Montgomery collection. As the senior curator of photography at the National Museum of American History, she had navigated thousands of historical corridors. Yet the next image in the sequence forced a sudden, visceral pause. Captured in 1853, the image depicts two teenage girls seated side by side on an ornate bench upon a plantation veranda. To the left, a white girl of 14, her golden hair meticulously arranged in Victorian ringlets, adorned in a gown of intricate lace. To her right sat a black girl of 15, also dressed in fine attire, an elegance that felt strikingly anomalous, if not subversive for someone of her presumed status in that era. An extraordinary composition, Natalie murmured, struck by the perceived intimacy of the pair. Most period iconography strictly enforced the architecture of power, depicting masters and subjects in a clear vertical hierarchy, never as equals sharing a single sanctuary. This photograph had long been celebrated as a rare artifact of interracial kinship in pre-Civil War Louisiana, a beacon of humanity amidst a fractured landscape. As she positioned the delicate relic into the high-resolution scanner, the silent narrative began to shift. The Montgomery collection was renowned for its unique glimpses into the antebellum South, but as the pixels sharpened, so did a sense of unease. Natalie realized that what the world saw as a portrait of affection might actually be a carefully staged performance of possession, a dark secret hiding in plain sight within the silver plating. As the enhanced digital image materialized on the monitor, Natalie descended into its granular depths. She methodically audited each quadrant of the frame, chronicling the whispers of decay for her preservation notes. But as her gaze swept across the lower hemisphere of the composition, a visual anomaly halted her breath. A metallic glint partially submerged beneath the heavy fabric of the black girl's hem disrupted the narrative of the scene. With a sharp adjustment of contrast and clarity, the blurred detail surrendered its secret. What had initially been dismissed as a decorative anklet or an elegant buckle revealed itself as something far more insidious, an ornate metal shackle meticulously disguised with aesthetic flourishes to mimic jewelry. It was unmistakably a mechanism of restraint, a chilling fusion of artistry and subjugation attached to the girl's ankle. A visceral chill coursed through Natalie's frame. The once heartwarming tableau of interracial kinship was instantaneously transfigured into a sinister documentation of curated captivity. This was not a portrait of friendship, but a staged exhibition of possession disguised as intimacy. Dr. Whitaker needs to see this. She murmured, her voice a fragile echo in the hollow silence of the laboratory. That evening, as the weight of her findings settled, Natalie was haunted by the expression she had previously misread. What the world saw as Victorian stoicism was in truth a profound, resigned suffering that had remained hidden in plain sight for over 170 years. Deep within the museum's climate-controlled labyrinth, housed in acid-free archives and labeled drawers, a long, silenced history had finally forced the present to look it in the eye. Natalie spent the morning navigating the silent corridors of documentation. Here, she whispered carefully, extracting a yellowed folder from 1972, the year the museum first inherited the Montgomery legacy. The acquisition letter provided a sterile introduction: Caroline Montgomery with her companion, Harriet, 1853. The ink was old, but the narrative it attempted to preserve was even more fragile. Dr. James Whitaker, the museum's director of historical research, leaned in, his intellectual curiosity piqued by the dissonance. Companion. That is a remarkably curated description. He remarked, his skepticism sharp. They found a handwritten addendum claiming Harriet was a favored house servant, treated with the affection of a family member, a recurring motif used by history's victors to soften the edges of a harsher reality. They pivoted to the cold, clinical financial records of the plantation. Amidst the sterile inventories where human lives were categorized as mere assets, an entry from 1851 emerged. Purchased female age $13,800. Intended companion for Miss Caroline. The term intended companion took on a chilling weight, a life reduced to a predetermined function, a living commodity bought to serve a psychological need. The investigation led them to the personal diary of Elizabeth Montgomery. Her elegant script masked a horrifying pragmatism. Acquired a suitable companion for Caroline today. The girl is well-mannered and speaks with refinement. But it was the final passage that struck Natalie with visceral force. To ensure she remains reliable, Thomas has fashioned a special arrangement, one that is both secure and befitting her position. The reality of the metal shackle was now clear. It was a bespoke restraint, a masterpiece of systemic cruelty designed to look like an ornament of status. As the records unfolded, the special arrangement was described with a chilling sense of pride. Harriet and Caroline spent their afternoons in shared literacy and enlightenment granted with strict boundaries. The gold filigree was a calculated aesthetic choice, elegant enough for Harriet to accompany Caroline in the public eye without disrupting the plantation's veneer of refinement. It was a masterpiece of deception, masking a structural cruelty. It's more profound than a simple loss of liberty, Natalie remarked softly. She was forced to perform the role of a soulmate while physically bound. Harriet had been transformed into a living ornament, a curated companion meant to insulate a lonely heiress from the reality of her world. James nodded grimly, recognizing a systemic pattern. If this charade was enacted at Montgomery, it was likely a silent epidemic across the landscape hidden under different euphemisms. Their pursuit led them to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., a labyrinth containing thousands of narratives from the Federal Writers Project of the 1930s. After days of navigating the digital ghosts of the past, Natalie struck a vein of historical truth, a 1937 interview with an elderly woman named Harriet Johnson in Chicago. Her birth year and Louisiana origins aligned perfectly with the haunting gaze of the girl on the veranda. I was purchased specifically to be a shadow to the daughter. Harriet's words echoed across the century. They adorned me in fine fabrics and permitted me to read, though the law forbade it. But do not mistake their vanity for kindness. I wore a gold chain on my ankle for 4 long years, liberated only when the bolt of my bedroom door was slid shut at night. They christened it her special bracelet, a psychological tether that suggested gold was a privilege, while the rest of her world wore the unvarnished weight of iron. But a chain is a chain no matter how pretty. Harriet's words act as a scalpel, peeling back the layers of a curated history. Miss Caroline preferred to perform the role of a true friend. Perhaps she even succumbed to her own delusion. But friendship does not exist within the architecture of ownership. Harriet recounted the mandate to speak with refinement dressed with elegance and mirror, Caroline's every move from social galas to private lessons, serving as a living exhibit of the Montgomery family's enlightened cruelty. The decorative shackle ensured Harriet remained a captive participant, even in moments of celebration. The photographer arrived for Miss Caroline's 14th birthday. The narrative continued. They adorned Harriet in her finest attire, yet its simplicity was designed to highlight Caroline's opulence. Caroline cherished that portrait as a testament to their bond, blind to the fact that the metallic restraint at Harriet's ankle was the only honest element in the frame. The archives chronicled Harriet's eventual escape amidst the fractured landscape of the Civil War. She fled north, where she built a life of autonomy, raised a family, and ultimately offered her testimony to the Federal Writers Project. She survived to reclaim her narrative, Natalie whispered, feeling a profound temporal bridge to the girl in the daguerreotype. Harriet's voice, long silenced by the weight of silver plating, was finally rising to the surface. The final passage of Harriet's account struck Natalie with visceral clarity. People today might see two girls being friends, unaware that one was the property of the other. That is the mechanics of subjugation. It often drapes itself in beauty, but beneath the fabric there are always chains. Reinvigorated, Natalie assembled a task force, including Dr. Marcus Johnson and digital specialist Emily Parker, to audit the museum's entire visual history. We must re-examine every supposedly harmonious portrait, Natalie declared, focusing specifically on the peripheral details and lower margins often cropped in historical publications. They engineered an algorithm to scan the digital archives for specific visual signatures of concealed power dynamics. 2 weeks later, Emily presented a tablet of unsettling discoveries. We've identified 43 potential matches. The investigation's scope expanded with chilling precision. Out of the 43 suspected portraits, 7 were confirmed to feature concealed restraints, shackles masquerading as jewelry and golden ribbons masking rigid metallic bands. Dr. Marcus Johnson examined the evidence with grim recognition. This aligns perfectly with the historical record of companionate bondage. He noted a practice as insidious as it was curated. This was a specialized form of subjugation where the dispossessed were forced to function not merely as labor, but as emotional anchors for the children of the elite. The psychological weight is staggering, Natalie observed. To mandate a performance of intimacy while maintaining a physical tether is a profound violation of the human spirit. Their research soon unearthed plantation records from Georgia to Virginia detailing acquisition protocols and aesthetic restraint standards for domestic companions. A diary from a Virginia estate offered a visceral look into this mindset. Purchased a bright young girl for Mary's companion. Had the silversmith craft an attractive chain, ensuring no social discomfort when they appear together in society. For the plantation aristocracy, an elegantly dressed, articulate companion was a mobile exhibition of wealth and perceived benevolence. It was a social currency, one that other families observed with envy and sought to replicate. Marcus explained that these arrangements were frequently born of geographic isolation. On vast rural estates, the daughters of the elite often lacked peers of their own social standing. In this vacuum, the forced companion became a solution, a living ornament designed to mitigate loneliness while reinforcing the hierarchy of power. They were captives dressed in silk, existing in a permanent state of curated proximity, yet forever denied the agency of true friendship. A profound, heavy silence settled over the conference room as Natalie concluded her presentation. The projected image of Harriet and Caroline remained fixed on the screen, the magnified section revealing the disguised shackle with undeniable clarity. This discovery fundamentally redefines how we curate and interpret this artifact. Natalie asserted, her voice carrying a steady, resolute weight, and potentially dozens of others currently housed in our archives. Richard Townsend, the museum's senior director, appeared visibly troubled. "This is powerful research, Dr. Chen, but we must weigh the implications with extreme care." He was alluding to a complex intersection of ethics and influence. The Montgomery collection came anchored by significant preservation funding, and the family's descendants still maintained seats on the executive board. A revelation of this magnitude threatened to disrupt the institution's foundational stability. "That is precisely why transparency is non-negotiable," Natalie countered. "This isn't merely about a single frame. It's about dismantling a systemic misrepresentation of the human experience." Her stance found an immediate ally in Dr. Eliza Washington, head of African American history. "I stand with Natalie. We hold a moral imperative to present these narratives accurately, especially now that we have Harriet's own testimony to bridge the gap between image and reality." Harriet was no longer a silent specter in a daguerreotype. She had become a primary witness reclaiming her own agency. The dialogue within the room had shifted from archival logistics to a battlefield of memory, pitting the comfort of curated legacies against the urgent need to restore dignity to those whose suffering was once masked by gold filigree and Victorian lace. Anything less would perpetuate the erasure of her experience. The deliberation stretched into the late hours, a tug-of-war between institutional preservation and moral clarity. Concerns regarding donor optics and public relations volatility permeated the room. "What is your specific mandate?" Richard finally asked. Natalie answered without a tremor in her voice. "A specialized exhibition titled Hidden in Plain Sight. We will juxtapose the original sanitized narratives with the unvarnished reality, the disguised restraints, the mandated companionship, and most crucially, Harriet's own testimony." Dr. Eliza Washington proposed integrating interactive elements, allowing visitors to experience the process of discovery firsthand, unveiling the hidden architecture of the frame. Marcus suggested drawing lines to the present, exploring how modern exploitation often masks itself behind benevolent facades. Richard, weighing the heavy gravity of institutional politics against scholarly rigor, sighed. "The Montgomery descendants must be briefed." Natalie concurred, but with a caveat. "They must be presented with findings as historical fact, not as a point of negotiation. The evidence is irrefutable." Inside the mahogany-paneled chambers of Hartwell and Reed, beneath the stern gazes of ancestral portraits, Natalie sat across from the Montgomery heirs. "This is preposterous," declared Eleanor Montgomery Williams, her voice sharpened by 70 years of perceived prestige. You are attempting to defame my lineage based on a shadow in a relic. Natalie calmly ignited her screen, displaying the high-definition enhancement. It is not a shadow, Ms. Williams. It is an engineered restraint, corroborated by the very words of the woman who wore it. When Eleanor attempted to dismiss Harriet's 1937 interview as hearsay, Natalie revealed the definitive blow, the diary entries of Eleanor's own great-great-grandmother. The revelation stripped the room of its defensive posture. Eleanor blanched. Richard navigated the tension with diplomatic grace, framing the discovery not as an indictment of a single family, but as a correction of a widespread cultural blindness. For Natalie, however, this was more than professional duty. It was the fulfillment of a silent promise to the girl in the photograph, ensuring that her chains, though gilded, would never be forgotten again. My ancestors were pillars of Louisiana society. Eleanor insisted, her voice trembling with defensive pride. They treated their people with the kindness the era permitted. Marcus, interjecting with the weight of historical authority, countered, with all due respect, forcing a child to perform friendship while anchored by a metal tether is not kindness by any century's standards. It is a curated violation of agency. The family's legal counsel leaned on the donation agreement, hinting at a formal injunction. Yet Richard remained unmoved. You may delay the exhibition, but you cannot suppress the science. Dr. Chen's findings will be published. The choice for your family is simply be remembered as partners in an honest historical reckoning or as the architects of a cover-up. It was a younger Montgomery relative who finally broke the stalemate, urging a path of transparency over tradition. As the meeting adjourned, Eleanor stopped Natalie, her bitterness palpable. You believe this is noble, but you are merely unearthing a trauma that was better left in the shadows. Natalie met her gaze with unwavering clarity. Harriet was silenced by her chains for years, yet she survived to ensure her narrative endured. Don't you think she has waited long enough for the world to listen? With the institutional barriers dismantled, the team pivoted toward the Hidden in Plain Sight exhibition, set to debut in 6 months. Emily, deep in the digital archives, unearthed a pivotal discovery, a sustained correspondence between the Montgomerys and the Whitfield family of Georgia. This was no isolated anomaly. It was an exchange of best practices for maintaining companionate bondage, a sophisticated interstate network of systemic control disguised as domestic harmony. The investigation revealed that this was no isolated incident, but a sophisticated contagion. Correspondence between elite families exposed a network where systemic control was shared as a refined social grace. Elizabeth Montgomery had seemingly pioneered the concept of the decorative restraint, an innovation swiftly adopted by other plantation mistresses who viewed it as an elegant solution for companion management. It was a dark exchange of social engineering. Dr. Marcus tracked the financial footprints of this practice to the ledgers of high-end silversmiths. He found specialized entries for decorative anklets and companion bracelets that went beyond mere aesthetics. These orders included precise technical specifications. The items were to be engineered as permanent fixtures, unremovable without a master key. This was beauty utilized as a barrier specifically tailored for young women between the ages of 10 and 16. Dr. Washington observed that this was a profoundly gendered form of bondage. Enslaved girls were hand-picked for their intellect and poise, granted superficial privileges like fine silk and literacy. Yet the price of these amenities was the most grueling form of toil, emotional labor. They were mandated to perform a believable intimacy to mirror the affections of their enslavers. In auction records, children with pleasing temperaments or refined features commanded premium prices, euphemisms, for those who could most convincingly play the role of a friend. Perhaps most disturbing was how these portraits were enshrined in family albums, presented as evidence of a benevolent regime. Natalie realized that the enslavers weren't concealing these arrangements. They were showcasing them. It was viewed as the ultimate exhibition of enlightenment and absolute power. As Marcus added, this was not merely the ownership of a body, it was a claim over the victim's internal landscape, an attempt to colonize their very emotions and relationships. This investigation evolved beyond exposing concealed restraints. It became a quest to dismantle a system of emotional exploitation long obscured by sanitized narratives. The team expanded their reach to private archives nationwide, uncovering a chilling consensus. The Historical Society of Louisiana identified 3 more portraits, Emily reported, alongside an estate inventory that categorized companion restraints as high-value assets. A pattern emerged across the South, a specialized cruelty reserved for the upper echelons of the plantation elite. Dr. Washington's oral history research surfaced 11 distinct accounts of these forced unions. The most profound breakthrough arrived through Gloria Thompson, the great-great-granddaughter of Rachel, who served a Virginia tobacco heiress. Rachel was isolated from other children to maintain a veneer of refinement, and each night she was anchored to a bed frame by a metallic tether. Her proximity to power was never a privilege, it was a curated confinement. Gloria preserved a haunting artifact, a decorative gold cuff with an internal locking mechanism. Rachel had kept this relic after her wartime escape as a visceral testament for her descendants. Never forget what pretty things can hide. The cuff was nearly identical to the one in the Montgomery photograph, confirming these were manufactured commodities, industrialized tools of psychological control. With over 60 examples identified, the team had finally mapped the geography of this forgotten practice. Opening night of the exhibition, hidden in plain sight, drew a sea of scholars and witnesses. The centerpiece featured the Montgomery portrait equipped with interactive lighting. With the press of a button, the disguised shackle was brought out of the shadows. Surrounding it were the testimonies of girls who were mandated to perform intimacy while deprived of agency. "We are not just revealing hidden objects," Natalie explained to the press. "We are revealing how history itself camouflages disturbing truths within seemingly innocent frames." Visitors stood in profound silence before the display containing the gold cuff, an artifact whose ornate exterior masked a ruthless locking mechanism, transmuting finery into a tool of confinement. Digital interactive stations allowed the public to audit historical photographs themselves, recreating that visceral moment of revelation when the pixelated shadows surrendered their secrets, just as Natalie had experienced at the start of her journey. The public response was a tidal wave of emotion. Some wept while reading the raw testimonies of the dispossessed, while others engaged in rigorous dialogues regarding ancestral responsibility. Eleanor Montgomery Williams maintained a stoic facade, Yet the younger generation of her lineage stood, moved to tears before Harriet's narrative. The exhibition was no longer a mere gallery display. It was a necessary, albeit painful, bridge between a curated past and an honest present. Gloria Thompson stood with quiet dignity beside her ancestors' restraint, sharing a vital philosophy with those who passed by. Rachel intended for us to remember not to harbor bitterness, but to cultivate the discernment to recognize subjugation, even when it is draped in the finest silk. Her presence was a living testament, granting a long overdue agency to a voice once silenced by gold filigree. 1 year after its debut, Hidden in Plain Sight had traveled to 7 major institutions, sparking a nationwide reevaluation of photographic archives. Over 40 additional companion portraits were identified using Natalie's methodology, transforming what was once an invisible practice into an indelible chapter of the historical record. The academic community was no longer looking at the past through a sanitized lens. Watching a young girl study Harriet's portrait with intense focus, Natalie knew the institutional battles were worth the cost. The project had evolved into a broader movement, a mandate to scrutinize seemingly benign historical narratives for the hidden evidence of both oppression and the unyielding human spirit. History may attempt to camouflage its darkest truths behind beauty, but truth once unmasked will always find its way to the light. The exhibition's resonance catalyzed an institutional shift. New protocols emerged, demanding that we look beyond the central subjects to the margins and shadows where the suppressed narratives of history often reside. A package arrived for Natalie from Eliza Montgomery, Eleanor's granddaughter. Inside lay a leather-bound volume, Caroline Montgomery's personal diary, from the 1850s. The note was brief. "This belongs to the record of truth, not to our family's shadows." With careful hands, Natalie navigated the fragile pages. Caroline's youthful script revealed a chillingly complex dynamic moments of perceived intimacy, intertwined with a casual, inherited sense of ownership. One entry in particular vibrated with a haunting dissonance. "Harriet appeared heavy-hearted today. I reminded her of her fortune to be my companion rather than to toil in the fields. She remained silent, but I watched her hand drift to her ankle chain when she thought my gaze was elsewhere." The diary exposed how a cruel system seduces the privileged into seeing subjugation as benevolence. "At times I wish the restraint were not required," Caroline confessed, "but Mother insists it is necessary. I gave her a silk ribbon to adorn the metal to lend it a touch of grace." A ribbon to mask a shackle, a perfect metaphor for a society that preferred aesthetic denial over moral accountability. As Natalie secured the diary in its archival box, she felt the gravity of a collective human tragedy. This was not a binary tale of villains and victims, but a study of how a structural cruelty binds everyone within its reach. The photograph that had sparked the investigation was no longer a benign relic. Once the veil is lifted and the hidden chains are brought into the light, history can never be viewed with the same innocence again.